Hello. Oh, it's us connecting. Hey, welcome everyone. So glad to have you here. Got some new faces. JT, welcome. Jackson, welcome. A lot of old faces. Good to see you. Youre, Amanda, Tommy, Christine, Harry. Excited to have you all here. In the spirit of leveraging the present moment, I have prepared absolutely nothing. So we will explore leveraging the present moment and creating from the present moment in giving presentations. But essentially, take a moment to notice that you exist in this moment. We talked about experience as sort of 3 dimensions, or the 3rd dimension a couple weeks ago, where you're immersed in this 3-dimensional reality. It's kind of like, in some ways, it's kind of like going from watching a movie screen to putting on VR headset, where there's a lot more sort of dynamic range in terms of what you can interact with. There's some sort of almost experiential sense of doing that when you drop into the present moment. It's your attention isn't so entirely focused on just the thing that you're working on. You really notice that you exist in the space that you're in, exist as a human being, exist in the room that you're in, exist on the walk that you're on, or exist while you're eating, or whatever else you're doing. And going back to a couple weeks ago, and putting it a little bit further, there's almost a quality of richness that comes from just the awareness of that existence, just from the beingness of being, that you don't need circumstances to be a particular way to have that richness. You don't need things to be going your way, so to speak, or the way that you're fixated on or attached to in order to have positive feelings. You don't need that. You can just be enjoying this moment. And we often get pulled out of this moment. And what do we get pulled out of this moment to? Or how does that happen? Either we see something, or we hear something, or we feel something, or we think something, right? Or other sensations, I suppose. But those are the predominant ones. And they tend to spiral us in some sort of feeling or thinking pattern, or attention giving pattern, like doing. There's nothing wrong with that. In the space of creating, however, to actually create something new, there has to be some amount of awareness present. Otherwise, we're creating from our conditioning. We're living life in the conditioned autopilot patterns that we've been sort of living for the foreseeable past, right? Or this recent past, ongoing past, right? All of that just perpetuates itself. And if you look at the future, what the future might look like, it's going to continue forward from what you've been doing, as long as you stay relatively unconscious in these automatic autopilot patterns. And first, there's nothing wrong with that. Second, you don't really have that much control over it. You have a little bit of say, and that's what we'll talk about today. But the moments when you actually wake up and you're present, that you exist, that you can make a choice, or that there's even a choice to be made, those happen out of your control. It's like when you're sleeping, you can't control when you wake up. You can set an alarm the day before, the night before. Sometimes you sleep through your alarm. Usually you don't. But you can set an alarm, and that can be a helpful tool But let's say you're not setting alarms. We could talk about setting alarms sort of metaphorically in a second. If you're not setting an alarm, you just wake up when you wake up. And that's sort of how it is in terms of waking up into being present, waking up into being conscious, waking up into realizing that you exist and have some creative capacity in this three-dimensional reality we inhabit for a relatively brief amount of time. So just take a second again to get present to the fact that you exist, that you're here, because the more you can get this feeling as an experience, the more it starts to pop up. It's like when you get a new car, you start to see that car everywhere. When when, like, for example, we name our daughter Aurora, now we started to see Aurora everywhere. It's like, oh, I've got Aurora branded figs and, all sorts of other things that you don't think about, but once you have something, an anchor to hook experience on, you start to see it more and more. And so when you have an experience like what it feels like to be present, you will hook into that more often. And this is equivalent to waking up more often and actually having that creative capacity in those moments. And at first, it's really just about being aware of what it feels like to be awake in this way. The other thing I wanted to talk about, setting alarms, metaphorical alarms. That's one thing that the daily check-in is in the Big Shift course. It's an alarm that when you go to it, it asks you to pay attention. It asks you to feel into your body. But you can set any number of different alarms, right? Even coming on this call is sort of an alarm. For me, my coaches and therapists and the people, my clients who work with me, I am their alarm, and my coaches are my alarm in some way to have a chance to be conscious and creative and present, and to pause, get connected to what feels important to me, work through the obstacles that I'm, aware of or maybe unaware of that are keeping me from taking the actions I want to take. Or from perceiving and experiencing reality in the way I want to perceive and experience reality. And resolving those things so that when I do go back into the more doing, thinking, feeling way of living, and we all go back to that, we all slip back into doing. It's like we have a certain amount of time where we can plan, think, and then we have our plan created and we go into doing. And if we're not, if we haven't worked through the emotions to make sure that our doing is aligned and made sure that our planning, the strategic thinking, is aligned with our feelings, then oftentimes the doing starts off in a direction that we want, but then heads towards distraction, procrastination, or avoidance. So when I talk about leveraging the power of the present moment, or leveraging the present moment, I just want you to get a sense of how essential this moment is. And this moment is not a moment, you're not always conscious of this moment. I'm not always conscious of this moment. The whole idea of time, sort of, sometimes we forget about time altogether. And actually, when you're in this moment, time doesn't even really exist as an experience. Time is a concept, a construct. that we can reflect on and use as a way to think about or plan for things, or to set up meetings or whatever else, like this group call and hangout. But this moment is such an interesting experience to be aware of when you're aware of it. So I'm going to keep bringing us back to this for the next couple of minutes. It's because I really want you to get a sense of what it's like to exist in this moment. And if there's any sort of stress or anxiety or frustration or like this, I don't know what's being talked about, notice that that's there in the moment. That's a part of this experience, and that's okay. That's usually that can be a part of this. If there's not a clear, like, oh, I get this, there's this almost stress that's associated, for me at least, with like a desire to understand when I'm not understanding something. And so if that's there, that's great. That's not a problem. And if you stick with it, it'll clarify. It just takes a little bit of time and space. So one thing we can do is to, again, come back into being aware that we exist in the three-dimensional reality that we're in right now. So you can notice the screen you're looking at, the background behind the screen. And notice your physical body's place in this room or space. I'm trying to draw your attention to the experience of existing. And now you can bring your attention to the sounds. The sounds that are present, my voice, for me, the motorcycle outside, or the air conditioner, or the fan on my computer. What are the sounds in your environment? But notice your body's relationship to the sound, or that the consciousness that you inhabit, or that inhabits you, is here in this room, in this space. And I want you to just move from this awareness to the fact that you are creative, right? You can draw things and you can write things. You can build things online. You can send a letter or call someone. And you are creative in all of those acts. There's a certain power in realizing how creative you are. That you are creating in every single moment that you exist. And in these bi-weekly gatherings and the YouTube videos and the courses that I'm working on, all of that is about helping you get better at, one, being conscious more so that you can be creative in a conscious way more, and working through the insecurities and senses of smallness and doubts that we have about our creativity, about reclaiming that or claiming that, about resolving the questions of worth, right? In some cases, if we feel we're unworthy or insecure, we narrow our creative capacity in such a way that we're only creating with the hope that someone else will tell us that we're worthy. And so our creative capacity is narrowed to a very small range of things that are okay to do, things that we do to get this sort of validation back from our environment. And it's actually participating in that pattern that reinforces this sense of smallness or insecurity, because the assumption behind that is that we're not enough. And when you act from this assumption, you reinforce this assumption. And you keep experientially finding that when you do get the praise or the validation, the high, the good feeling that comes from it doesn't last very long. And when you do actually come into the present moment, that conversation doesn't happen. You're just here. You just exist. You're just here now. There's no seeking for validation or approval. There is feeling what there is to be felt. There's seeing what there is to be seen. There's hearing what there is to be heard. And there's doing what there is to be done. But there is no act of trying to resolve a feeling when you're present. When you fall out of presence, if there's an unpleasant feeling, you might act unconsciously to try to resolve that feeling. Does that make sense? In the big shift, when we learn to listen to our feelings as signals, our emotions as signals, we're really creating a pause there. We're allowing ourselves to be present with the experience. And let that guide our behavior or action. But that is only one step. Because even the big shift is only letting us see the sort of low-hanging fruit. At some point, we come up against this bigger feeling that you can't easily pluck as a fruit off the tree, which is this sort of existential smallness or insecurity or ultimate aloneness, where you start to grapple with existence itself. What do I do? Right? You start to realize that no amount of, it's not even about worth, it's about no amount of experience is actually satisfying either. So going back to 2 weeks ago, we talked a little bit about the levels, where we start off in unconscious doing, and then we transition to conscious narrative or conceptual awareness, where we're objectifying ourselves and in life, and we can manage the doer from this separate consciousness. And then we stretch ourselves into feeling at level 3, and we're in the experience, but we're still sort of identified in this small self framework, to finally level 4 into this identity as awareness itself, as consciousness itself, where it doesn't make sense to try to act to make ourselves feel good. And this is like going super out there. So I don't expect most people to get this immediately, because this is, once you start to operate from level 4 all the time, that's effectively like enlightenment, right? So this is something that you might have tastes of, and I'm trying to provide you a taste of this level 4 awareness in this talk specifically, of how when you bring yourself into this moment and the past falls away and the future falls away, the whole idea of you doesn't exist in the same way, because you're not trying to get some validation from your environment in the future. And you're not running away from some regret or guilt or fear of mistake or someone's perception of you from the past that you're trying to prove wrong or something like that. You're just here. And when you're just here, you shed all of that baggage when you're in the present moment. You get pulled back into that baggage with strong feelings, and that's why it's important to do sort of trauma work and all sorts of other things. I'm glad you get it, Christine. I'm going to wrap up here, and why don't you join me at one of the tables? I'll see you in a couple minutes.